Hello, so I've got a little book review for you today, and I've absolutely blitzed this volume. It is W.E. Fairbairn, The Man Who Taught the OSS How to Get Tough by Stephen Brown, who is a chap I know from the Gutter Fighters International Facebook group. And it is, first of all, a marvellous volume. Got it hot off the press yesterday, went through it late last night and this morning. You can tell it's been used, loved and abused because I've already spilt tea and coffee all over it, luckily, as I got towards the end. But all good books deserve to be covered in tea and coffee. If it's not dog-eared, if it's not bent, if it's not marked, tagged and scribbled in, it's not loved nearly enough. The only clean books I got are boring ones. So, to the book. It is a chunky old monster. this tea stains again. So how many pages is it? 500 pages in total, and in essence what it does is it chronicles Fairbairn's time teaching, training and working with the OSS over in America, and he spent the majority of the war over there. So whilst many of us, when we think about Fairbairn, we think about him in the UK training commandos SOE in the earlier part, it's obviously fair to say that he spent the larger portion of his time over the sea with the Yanks and the Canucks, and it's a really interesting volume. There are lots of things in here that are very hard to find, and many things in here which are really first time viewing for many people, myself included, and it is a fantastic treasure trove. So everything from training areas and how they were set up and what locations they're in. There is correspondence with lots of different people. So I suppose I'll break some of the areas down. So first of all, it's a bit of a potted history of what Fairbairn was doing and where he was at different times from 42 to 45. And that's a really interesting thing to find out about because there's not a huge amount of data available for it. Well, there is, people just haven't found it, and Steve found it. So it's a really interesting way to chronicle what he was doing and how he was operating. Very interestingly to me, I'll see if I can get to it with my dog-eared areas. There are things like how the curricula were taught, and again, excuse my coffee stainage here. So how the curricula was broken down and the redacted kind of techniques being taught. So we're familiar with Sykes's SOE syllabus, which is heavily redacted down. It's interesting to see that Fairbairn's syllabus also redacts down mightily, as far as we can tell. Lessons include chin jab, edge of hand blow, methods of kicking, sentry hold, thumb hold, Japanese strangle, hand hold, break-in for bear hugs, bent arm hold, handcuffed, arm throw and hip throw. So we can see how lessons are broken down, a lot of material taken out, a lot of the more kind of policing, restraint, locks, those are, some of it's still in there, is heavily redacted. How those lessons were broken down. So we've got in the book a kind of 6-lesson breakdown about how that curriculum is taught, which is really interesting to compare and contrast Sykes's 6-lesson piece from 43 and Fairbairn's 6-lesson piece too. It's interesting to see which elements they decided to take forward and hold as the most effective. It really breaks down training cycles for those that are teaching this stuff, and that's going to be main part of the gig, and those that are going through, so 5 days for instructors, a long course, and 2 days for participants, people just being upskilled or refreshed over a period of time in this stuff. So it's interesting to see how a long course works and how a short course worked. So it's really fascinating to see the practicalities of the curricula, training time, environments, equipment. So for me, that's what I find the most interesting in this, is how have they decided to break the curricula down, what they've seen as the most important, and how they're going to train those things that they've deemed as most important. But I would say, so you've got your history section, you've got your kind of curricular section, what is being taught and how it's being taught and what equipment you might need and the timings for those things being taught. And I find that really fascinating. There are kind of breakdowns of the transcripts and the scripting of the OSS gutter fighting films, of which there were 3. So we've got Knife, we've got Unarmed, and we've got Shooting to Live, and we've got the kind of scripts, and the people that were involved in filming and crafting those things are often drawn from Hollywood. So they're really good. I make adverts for a living. I'm a creative director. So it's interesting for me to see the kind of quality and order and structure of how these things were planned for film to maximise learning and engagement. You know, as someone that used to be a school teacher, now makes ads for a living, how they structured the learning for film, I find very fascinating. And you get a lot of insights in this book that you wouldn't get from just watching the films. You can really see the thought processes behind it, and the thought processes behind it are often the most interesting things overall. There's quite a lot of sections of correspondence and patenting. So if there is a certain procurement that Fairbairn wants of types of blade or things to experiment with and toolkits, you can see a lot of toing and froing and people backing and endorsing or sometimes rejecting Fairbairn on, I'd like 20 of those, 30 of those, 5,000 of these. But you can see he's kind of a passionate advocate for keeping on developing and growing and changing. You know, he kind of is rallying against the M3 trench knife in here and saying, no, this is not the tool. Why train someone on a good tool and then equip them with a shit tool? So it's quite an interesting way to see how Fairbairn's backing and repping his own materials and kind of coming against legalese, red tape, patenting, and scale. And you can obviously see the other side of the fence too. It's like, how many hundreds of thousands of dollars are we going to spend on this particular material when we might need all these other things too? So it's quite interesting to see the backwards and forwards battles, requests, support, advocacy between Fairbairn and his team and the people in the infrastructure around him. So there's kind of legalese, patenting, kind of productizing the stuff, which is really, really quite cool. And I'd say that by and large makes up the structure of the book. So history is timing and place, curricular, content and ordering, and then procurement, buying, and so on. And probably if I said 3 before, excuse me, let's go with 4. And then you've got the content which supports the films, the scripting, the planning, the construction of those films, and all in it makes for a very, very fascinating book. What Steve has decided to do is, instead of retyping the materials, a lot of them are kind of scanned in original format. Would have to say that if you are a bit short of sight, then I would definitely recommend your reading glasses. Obviously a lot of these documents are quite old, so you really need to focus and pay attention. I think in the future, perhaps if he moves to a digital copy, that might make it a bit easier for some people as well. You might be able to zoom in or expand and really get into it. I have no problems with it. I can see it just fine. But if Steve's watching this, a great thing for the future. I think digitized versions, for your oldies out there, they can really zoom in and get the details. But lots of kind of typewritten transcripts, notes, their graphics, like so, photographs, stills from the films, all sorts of stuff. So it's none of these are a kind of a guide per se. It's not a what they did kind of book in terms of instructionals, but it does lay out and illustrate very, very nicely how those things come to life. So, and you can see in the sections that chronicle kind of the histories, the publishing history of the content, how that ruffled some feathers, all sorts of things. But there, you can see here documents on some of the gadgets, gizmos and fighting tools that he wanted to see made and popularized and shared. So there's just a whole treasure trove of stuff in here. There'll be images and diagrams that you're very familiar with, and I guarantee you there'll be documents and dossiers and correspondence and graphics and illustrations and quotes in here that you've not seen anywhere else before. It is absolutely fantastic value for money. Like I said, it is a big old chunking volume, and personally, it's designed really for a reference book. You know, if you're training this stuff, drilling it, repping it, it's one of those things where once you've read it, you know, you can go back, right, that's the section I want to look at his redacted curriculum, or I wanted to see the points he's got. Some really interesting nuggets in here, things that people won't be familiar with, are where Fairbairn's talking about using a pencil for fighting and making a knife-type object out of newspaper, and how to use the small lapel knives. These kind of things are elements of the wider world of Fairbairn's training, the improvised weapon stuff that we don't really see in any of the published materials, but you do get to see in this. You get to see the thought process and how the psychology of World War II combatives really can be applied everywhere, and you can see in the dialogue and the scripting and the planning how he wants you to believe that anything can be a weapon and have any degree of armament is better than nothing. So it's really fascinating to see play out how the kind of improvised weapons, environmental weapons, smaller, more niche weapons, jackknife-based weapons, they're all addressed in this volume, and it's very, very interesting. And you can get a whole lot of insight about the psychology of the man, the training and andragogy, you know, the teaching methods and the curriculum making of the man in the latter stages of his career and at the latter stages of the war. It's absolutely fascinating. So, like I said, there's the cover if you missed me saying at the start. Steve Brown, W. Fairbairn, the man who taught the OSS to get tough. It is marvellous. Best place to get it thus far, although this may change in the future, but right now, best place to get it is on Lulu, which is like a print-on-demand style publishing website. Odds are you'll be able to get that in the most places around the world. But if not, if you find Stephen Brown on Facebook, I'm very sure if in your patch, if in your area, Lulu doesn't operate, he'll be able to guide and advise you. But if you can, and I imagine most people will be able to get their hands on it, absolutely do it. It's a marvellous volume. It's going to make it to the bookshelf. Even might get put in the right area, in the right structure. You can see the chaos of the bookshelf matches the chaos of my mind, but I wholeheartedly and fundamentally recommend this book. It's brilliant. So go out there, get it.